The Egyptians knew the nomes as sepat, or later nomos. As early as the First Dynasty, the elongated country is divided into smaller administrative units. They're located on both sides of the Nile and extend over 30 to 40 kilometers. Their Egyptian names are derived from the gods worshipped in the respective area. There are 42 nomes in total, 22 in the Delta, 20 in Upper Egypt. Once established, they remained valid until Greco-Roman times, that is, for millennia. The administration also sets taxes based on the water level of the Nile. On the island of Elephantine, there are several so-called Nilometers, which are used to measure the height of the annual Nile flood. The oldest of them is located near the Satis temple, a staircase with a marking scale. But there are other models.
All around the Nile, there were nilometers. These nilometers were connected with the Nile with pipes, and the water would be gathered in small rooms, and in these rooms the level of the Nile water could be very well estimated and measured, and accordingly the taxes for people would be estimated and would be set. More water meant a more rich outcome of the agriculture, would mean higher taxes, and the other way around. So this was really important for the administration in ancient Egypt.
Sending lemon into small pits. Yes. Wow, you do work in an enclosed space, don't you?
But it's much cooler down here.
It's lovely, actually.
So down at this level, we have sterile soil where nobody lived. And then starting around 4200 BC are layers of silt from the Nile flood, followed by wind-accumulated sand. And then another layer of silt, and then more sand. And here you can see it really well. A thin silt layer from the Nile coming up and flooding, and then the sand. And over here, we have a hearth feature. So this tells us that humans were actually living on these and coming into the Nile Valley and then moving back out. And we also found lots of potsherds and stone tools in these layers.
You know, it might be a small space, but you've got people's real lives unfolding within it, haven't you?
And we have thousands of years of it here. When we started, people were just moving into the Nile Valley. They were just starting to farm. And by the end here, we have pharaohs and a whole united Egypt. It's really impressive when you think about all the change that happened over this chunk of sand.
Although we are still centuries away from the grand pharaonic monuments, you can still find traces of the lives these ancient people lived, if you look hard enough. For very little has survived, except for tons of pottery.
Yeah, this one is, yeah.
So it's 5,000 years old?
So it's 5,000 years old.
They're also tactile, these things, aren't they?
These pots help us to identify when this early society began to produce a food surplus. A pivotal transition which required robust pottery for the storage of large-scale food and drink production. These bread moulds from slightly later are one of the most common finds.
So you heat the mold, then the dough gets into it, and by the heat of the mold, the bread will be baked. But this comes in massive amounts. These are the beer jars.
Ah, bread and beer.
Bread and
the
beer.
Egyptian staples. Oh, nice size for a beer jar. This is the nuts and bolts of how Egyptian chronology all came together in the early days, isn't it?
Yes. The pottery is especially fundamental to understand how people were living.
But even Egyptian administration would not have worked without another groundbreaking invention: writing. For the ancient Egyptians, hieroglyphs are words of God. They're used mainly for religious purposes and are said to have a magical meaning. painting of the elaborate ideograms is practiced on wooden tablets like these. They're covered with a white layer of stucco, so they can be used again and again. For everyday correspondence, however, the Egyptians used the so-called hieratic, where the hieroglyphic characters are simplified into strokes and groups of strokes. Papyrus and parchment are so valuable back then that people prefer to use shards of clay for everyday notes. In the late period, another form of writing appears, demotic. Its most striking feature compared to hieratic is the use of numerous abbreviations. The last ancient Egyptian script form is Coptic. It combines Greek letters with demotic symbols. The ancient Egyptians preserved their very special relationship to writing and images over the millennia.
When you see an ancient Egyptian tomb or a temple, you're struck by the amount of hieroglyphs as well as pictures that are on the walls. And for the Egyptians, these both things were very important. And in fact, a lot of their art is just blown up hieroglyphs, but for the people who are not literate. So the idea can be conveyed without people being able to read. And so the Egyptians also believed by writing it down, it was made real somehow. So these images, as well as these words that are written down, had a huge amount of power. And by writing them on temples and tombs, they were real. Whatever they said would happen. And also, if you spoke them, they would get added potency. So there was a lot of magic and power in the word.
However, in modern times, this magic seems forever lost, since no one can make sense of the hieroglyphs anymore, until this chunk of dark grey granodiorite is found. It's 1.12 meters high, 76 centimeters wide, and weighs 762 kilograms. How did this fragment of an ancient Egyptian stele help unlock the secret of the ancient script? It's mid-July 1799. French soldiers are building a fortification near the town of Rashid, also known as Rosetta. Engineer Lieutenant Pierre Bouchard immediately realizes the significance of this chance find. The Rosetta Stone, as it's called after its location, sends international experts into a frenzy. What makes it so unique is its trilingual inscription, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, in Demotic, and in ancient Greek. 3 times the same content. And thus, finally, the hoped-for clue to translate the hieroglyphs of the ancient Egyptians.
Yet in Egypt, living was only half the story. Because what really sets the ancient Egyptians apart is their view of death. To them, death wasn't the end of life, but a new beginning. A transformation from the world of the living into an everlasting afterlife. And such a belief would shape Egypt's most mysterious practice and my favourite subject. Mummification. Although the origins of this enigmatic tradition are only now becoming clearer, the burial of their dead had a strong significance from the very earliest times. This is a typical burial from around 3400 BC. The body is curled into the fetal position and here placed within a reconstructed pit grave, surrounded by the belongings he might have had in his earthly life, like pottery, jewellery, and a palette for preparing cosmetics.
Everything that was important to him in life accompanied him into death. And I think that's quite significant because it shows that already 5,500 years ago, the Egyptians wanted to take it all with them. They clearly believed that something happened beyond death. Death was simply a transition into another state of existence when you continued to live and it was assumed you would need everything you'd needed in your life on Earth.
His body was naturally mummified in the hot desert sand, but its placement here may not have been accidental. Because even when dead, the body had to be preserved in order to house the soul for eternity.
A skeleton simply wasn't good enough. Skeletons, bones, they are very, very anonymous. And yet, when the soft tissue, the skin, the hair is all present, we are ourselves. And that's exactly what this individual represents.
Being face to face with one of the very earliest Egyptians gives us insight into the development of their ideas about the afterlife.
It started off as a practical thing, burying the dead in a relatively small space, bundled up, and then it developed these layers of kind of like the symbolism, the fetal position, this idea in rebirth into the next world. It's almost like the seed from which the Egyptian funerary belief system evolved. This is the very beginning of a process which would be repeated a millionfold throughout Egyptian history.
For 23 years, experts pore over the inscription, alas without much success, until a young linguist, Jean-François Champollion, solves the riddle of the hieroglyphs in 1822. Champollion recognizes that hieroglyphic signs also stand for sounds and can be read like an alphabetic script. First, the Frenchman deciphers the name of the pharaoh Ptolemy. The 7 hieroglyphs stand for 10 Greek letters, yet that's only the beginning. By cracking the millennia-old code, Champollion opens up whole new possibilities for exploring ancient Egypt. Thanks to the countless preserved papyri, scientists can explore ancient Egyptian civilization. Even today, new documents continue to be discovered. Texts written by the elite of the country, mostly priests or officials. Future civil servants are taught to write from childhood. They also acquire specialized knowledge necessary for handling matters of economy, such as the drafting of contracts. And they learn the basics of mathematics, enabling them to calculate areas and volumes. In ancient Egypt, there's a civil servant for every task. More than 2,000 different official titles have been handed down.
The bureaucracy in ancient Egypt is quite strong since the unification of Egypt. With time, the officials, especially the high officials, gain more and more power and prestige. Some of them start to have really big and prestigious tombs.
In some of these burial chambers, statues have been found. High Egyptian officials like to have themselves immortalized as scribes. An emphasized obesity seems to have been a must in these portrayals. The scribe's chest appears almost feminine, and his belly has several folds, both attributes of power and wealth. A person's actual appearance, however, cannot be deduced from this. The coffin of Idu II. The remains of this high official are considered the best researched mummy from the Old Kingdom. During his lifetime, he was responsible for importing wood from Lebanon, a most valuable item. Idu's face has been reconstructed by forensic specialists in Germany. His head, modeled in the computer, is reworked sculpturally. The result of the elaborate facial reconstruction is amazingly realistic, including a contemporary hairstyle of braided pigtails.
Die Civil servants play a very important role in ancient Egypt, from the Old Kingdom to the Greco-Roman period. They are the ones who ensure that the state functions properly. The Great Pyramids, for example, could not have been built without this highly efficient administration. So without the officials and the priests, ancient Egypt would not have been the civilization we know today.